Hello and welcome to a brief video on animal communication. Everybody in the world who has ever loved a pet has thought, I wonder what's going on in their head, or even wanted to talk to these little companions. The question that this brings about is, could these animals communicate with us? Do they have the linguistic skills necessary to have language in the same way that humans do? This is a question that has stumped the scientific and linguistic community alike, and has been the basis of many studies of famous linguists like psychologists and many other areas of study. To understand if our animals can use our language, we must first define language, which complicates and clouds this process a lot. Thinkers like Charles Hockett said that we should not define the fundamental nature of language, but define the descriptive characteristics that every language must have. Through this, Hockett came up with the 9 design features of language. These 9 design features are semanticity, mode of communication, pragmatic function, interchangeability, cultural transmission, arbitrariness, discreteness, displacement, and finally, productivity. If these are the things that define language, then can animals use language? The simple answer is no. They cannot. But it turns out that animals can perform at a surprising amount of these design features, making scientists question if they can use language, just language by a different definition. To see if animals can use language, we must look at their communication systems and see what is actually going on when they communicate amongst each other. The first to dive into, modes of communication. There are 5 main modes of communication in the animal kingdom and among humans, being audible, visual, tactile, olfactory, and electrical signals. Audible signals are those that you are able to hear. In the animal kingdom, audible signals are common for warning other animals of danger, food, territory, and many other things. These can be yells, screams, or specialized audible modes like elephants, who use infrasound by sending very deep audible sounds that humans cannot hear. Next are the visual modes of communication. Visual modes of communication can include facial expressions and body language in animals and humans alike. Dogs and apes use their facial expressions and body postures to communicate desire, playing, submission, and many other messages. Fireflies use the special lights on their bodies to find mates by lighting up in specific patterns to attract females, who mimic their patterns back to the males that they are interested in. Next are the touching or tactile modes. These modes are very commonly used to show affection, with monkeys hugging each other to show affection. Big cats and rhinos even nuzzle each other to show trust and affection. Tactile modes aren't only for love though, they can be informative as well. Bees, which we will look at deeper later on, use tactile modes to communicate where food sources are. Next are the olfactory modes. These typically have to do with food sources, as smell is usually a great indicator of food. Insects like ants use pheromones in many ways. These scents can be used for many different purposes, including attracting mates. The scent is also used as a trail for ants. Different pheromones are used to communicate different messages. An ant puts out a pheromone for danger after it dies, and a pheromone for food after it leaves a food source, showing the other ants where to go by following the scent. The next mode of communication is electrical signals. These are less common, but used by fish and amphibians. This mode has been so successful because, unlike other modes, this one's very difficult to interrupt, as these can travel through clear and murky water alike. These messages are typically used to identify mates, regulate schooling among schooling species of fish, and determine territoriality. As we can see from all of these, there are animals that possess at least one part of human language, but what about the others? What other parts of human language do animals share? The next ones we will cover are fairly simple, semanticity and pragmatic function. These 2 features allow for all parts of language to be both meaningful and purposeful. Through observation of animal communication, it has been determined that all signals in their communication do serve a purpose. In animal communication, survival is the #1 priority, whether that be communication about eating, mating, or whether to defend their territory or flee. In many cases of animal communication, the pragmatic function is actually easier to define than in human language. The next design feature that animal communication exhibits is interchangeability. Most animals are observed being able to both send and receive messages, such as the fireflies signaling back and forth, or ants' ability to put out and also follow pheromones. There are some exceptions to these, such as silkworms, where females are the only ones that produce pheromones. The next design feature is cultural transmission, which requires that some of the language is learned through interaction with other members of the language. Many animals are born with the ability to communicate, like many altricial species, who cannot move upon birth, who must communicate their danger and hunger upon birth. However, there do seem to be animals with this feature, like killer whales and chimpanzees. Killer whales have distinct dialects based on their region because they learn communication system of their pod, not their species. Chimpanzees pick up the hand signs of those around them, not a universal chimpanzee language. Next is arbitrariness, where the form of the symbol is not related to its function. Most forms of animal communication are non-arbitrary because the form of the symbol relates directly to its meaning. For example, a dog growling and baring its teeth, the symbol of baring its teeth is directly related to its meaning, which is, I will bite you. In animals, non-arbitrariness is most common, showing the lack of complexity in animal language in this sense. Next is discreteness. Most animal systems are not discrete, as each message is an indivisible unit. An exception to this is bees, whose dances are built up of different complex parts being pattern, direction, and vivacity. Displacement and productivity are not ever found in animal communication. As far as we know, animals cannot come up with novel ideas or talk about objects that are not present in space and time. Those are all 9 of the design features, many of which animals possess, but a few of which they don't. There's not been any system of communication of animals which has seen all 9 design features. So if we want to talk to animals with our language, we might just give up now. But what linguists and scientists have figured out is that animals do communicate, sometimes extensively, but mainly only about survival. One of the most fascinating systems of communication is the bee. Bees have different dances that can communicate many different messages about food sources. After a bee returns to a hive, it will communicate to the other bees the location of a food source using one of 3 dance patterns, with variable repetition and vivacity to create different messages. The dance pattern has to do with the distance from the food source. A round, circular dance suggests a food source 20 or less feet away from the hive. A sickle, figure-eight shaped dance indicates it is about 20 to 60 feet away, and a tail-wagging dance shows a food source of over 60 feet away. The repetition and vivacity of a dance can determine the quality of a food that they are referring to. The angle the dance is done on a wall determines what angle from the sun the food source is located. The repetition of the dance gives more precise measurements to the food source, to narrow the distance down for its fellow bees. With all the possibilities for messages with this communication system, bees can communicate an infinite number of messages, but the messages can only be about finite things like food and danger. The absence of creativity in this language makes it qualitatively different from human language because it is complex but it lacks certain qualities of human language. The next communication system we will look at is bird communication. Many of you are probably familiar with these, especially if, like me, they wake you up in the morning. Birds communicate using both calls and songs, both of which have distinct properties that separate them from each other. Calls are short and simple sounds, and these are often used for warning predators, expressing territory or aggression, or with feeding and nesting. The songs are longer and are seasonal. It's been proven that these songs have definite meanings, with no novel ideas. Birds communicate through song in the rate of alternation between notes. Birds listen for the changing of notes and how much the note changes to interpret the message. In certain songbirds, there's even a syntax that all birds of the species follow. They will alternate between 2 notes as many times as they want, then sing a third note 2 or more times in a row, and finally end off with a 4th note. This system can only produce a small amount of messages, one of its major flaws and a major setback for birds in terms of actual language as humans have it. Now we look at primates, whose communication has been the center of many studies of linguistics due to the fact that humans share close to 99% of DNA with chimpanzees. Primates communicate with a great amount of verbal and facial cues. Their yells and calls have meaning, and they even have sounds and whirring noises that indicate items down below in the grass. Their calls can often deal with mating rituals or social and territorial issues. These monkeys have developed the ability in their language to lie on purpose, as they have figured out that it can get them more food. Chimpanzees and other monkeys have these complex systems, but can they use language as we define it? Many studies have been done on whether or not it is possible to teach animals language as humans know it, most of which focus on monkeys and great apes. In many older studies of primate language, trainers molded the hands of monkeys into ASL signs and gave them rewards for repeating signs they knew back until they knew them by memory. Many of these studies were criticized because they did not prove that the monkeys knew how to use sign language. Rather, they were using signs as mental mental representation for an action, and they realized that these signs got them rewards. These monkeys were thought to know hundreds of signs, but it seems that about 40% of those were just repetition back to the trainer, and there were very few accounts of spontaneous communication, just responses. Though no studies have found animals who can use language in the same way that we can, many animals communicate in unique and fascinating ways. Just because these animals do not have the same structures as us and cannot talk like us does not take anything away from their communication systems. This does not mean that all the people who want to talk to their dogs never will, but it is the way that those who have no way of communicating to each other with equal terms that is most beautiful. The strongest of love is not formed through being able to talk. It is being able to communicate in different ways and still feel loved. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.